So now that we have the fixture plate set up, what I'm going to do is position the raw stock and dovetail stock on this fixture plate. So I'm just going to turn this around. I'm going to make sure I've got the fixture plate selected so that any sketches and construction planes I produce appear in here rather than under the main heading. And I'm going to go create. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to do offset plane. I'm going to just choose the top surface, so one on top of these notches. Hit OK. Then I'm going to create a sketch on that plane. I'm going to just hide the raw stock for now. Dovetail stock. I'm going to draw a rectangle. And then I'm going to dimension this rectangle with the dimensions of the raw stock. So let me just make these visible again, find out what the actual measurements are. So 18.25 and do by 29.3. So 18.25 by 29.3. And then what I want to do is position that over the center. Sorry, let me hit top again. Over the center of the base plate. Now in this case, this isn't really necessary because the stock is pretty much already over center. So I'm just going to do this for illustrative purposes. I'm going to project the outer edge of this fixture plate, like so, and that's going to give me a center point. So I can go from the center there, like so. Maybe go for these construction lines, and then select the coincident constraint, and that centers everything. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hide these joints first, and now what I'm going to do is use that sketch to position my locator. So I want the edge of my locator to line up roughly with the edge there. It doesn't have to be exact, it's just to give you a rough guide. But before you do that, you want to position your rack because your locator is positioned to your rack. So we know the locator is going to be roughly here, so we want the rack to sit in there. So what I'm going to do is just create a joint. I'm going to select the edge that I want. You can do this any number of ways, but first just check it's a rigid joint, which it is. I'm going to use two edges, so select that edge and that edge. And then I'm just going to hide this. And I know that those edges want to line up with these two edges. And I'm going to spin it around 180 degrees and then click OK. Now that I have the rack position where I want it, I'm just going to bring this sketch up again. I'm going to try and position this locator so the edge butts up against the edge of the stock, or the edge of this line here. With a locator, for this kind of stock, I could just use this flat edge, but I'm going to show you using the soft jaw on the front of the assembly, the locator assembly here, which if I expand it out, I'll make it visible. So I'm going to use the soft jaw, and that's just because I want to illustrate something when I create a joint. So what I'm going to do is create another joint. I'm going to select two edges again, and I'm going to make sure it's a rigid joint. As a little note, the whatever joint you used previously will automatically be selected. So if I'd used a planar joint for the rack component, that would still be selected, but because I used a rigid joint is still selected. So I'm going to select two edges on the locator, this edge and this edge. and then I'm going to select 2 edges on the rack component. I'm going to make the fixture plate just invisible for a moment. I'm going to hide this sketch for a moment. I'm going to use these 2 edges here and see how it lines up. Now you'll notice that this is what I wanted to illustrate by using the soft jaw. You notice that the soft jaw doesn't actually move initially. These are joined together, so if I hit OK, the soft jaw then moves into position, and that looks alright. It's never going to be exactly perfect, but I think moving it back 1 tooth would then leave it further away, so it doesn't really matter. I'll just leave it as it is for the moment. Now there are a few things that I want to highlight before I go any further. If I make the fixture plate visible again, the first of these is that I've removed the fillets and chamfers from these notches on the fixture plate, and I've also removed any cutouts and so on the rack component. And this is so that you just get a really nice edge to form a joint with, so it's just an easy 2 edges there, join up to the edges on the notches, so it's really easy to join them and it doesn't overcomplicate things, and that doesn't affect the locational accuracy at all. The second thing I've done, if I hide this locator component here, or locator assembly, second thing I've done is widen the racks. So you'll see that they now take up the full width of these channels in the fixture plate. Again, that's just to make it really easy to form joints. It doesn't overcomplicate things, and it doesn't affect the locational accuracy. All it does is make these teeth a little bit wider. What I haven't done, however, on the locator component is widen those teeth. So you'll see, if I go like this, you'll see that the teeth haven't been widened, so there's still actually a gap. It's really important to leave that, because whether this is located to the left of the rack, sorry, let me just get this view up. So you see here, I've formed the joint on the left side of the rack, so it's pushed up against the notches here on the fixture plate. You could, however, position it on the right side of the rack, so pushed up against this side here. And that, of course, will mean that the soft jaw is moved slightly to the right, whereas at the moment it's moved to the left. In a previous video, I did actually explain that when you're tightening this down, just push to one side. It doesn't matter which side, but just make sure whatever you have in your model reflects what you've done in real life. The final thing to note is that I'm not actually going to use the T-nut. I don't see the point. I've included it in this CAD file just in case anyone does want it, but the T-nut just goes into that slot there and you just screw down into it. It doesn't really add anything by positioning that below, other than just a bit of extra work.